This is a Decentered media vlog with me, Rob Watson. Conversations about community media. Visit decentered.co.uk or follow on Instagram and Twitter at Decentered Media.
Hello, it's Rob Watson here. I'm just come out to a coffee shop to have a break. This is a Decentered media vlog, and I just want to go through some stuff to do with the Ofcom diversity and inclusion report in the UK television and radio industries, and kind of highlight some issues that I think are worth further consideration and discussion. It's something I'm looking to do a future podcast on around a Decentered media podcast. So it's kind of these are kind of fairly thoughts in formation rather than specific verified ideas. But Ofcom have just published their 5-year review of the data that they've been collecting about inclusivity and diversity in the UK media industry. So it's quite interesting reading because they've noted a couple of things. One is that their data collection process is improving from when they first started in 2016. They've got a lot more information that they can report back, whereas they're now in a position where they feel a bit more confident about what it is that they are being told by many of the organisations, the BBC, the commercial organisations that they're working with to think about inclusivity. However, they've still got big gaps, and they've got very little information about things like the more voluntary identifications, so things like religion, sexual orientation, social economic backgrounds. That's not generally well known. Ofcom have not been able to collate the data about that in working with these media organisations, and they've not really got a lot of information that demonstrates how these things intersect. So where different characteristics of different people who are typically maybe marginalised in employability concerns or employment terms, so they don't rise up through the ranks and up to management levels. That's where Ofcom feels as if a lot of the work in the future needs to take place. But they've got a better idea, they suggest, of the kind of minority ethnic groups that work in radio and television. But one of the things they've noticed with since the pandemic, or with the pandemic, is that actually people are leaving the industries, and they particularly noted that women are leaving the radio industry in particular to go and work elsewhere. Well, they don't give a destination for it, but it's not. They're not retaining people who've got maybe experience and expertise. People are deciding to move elsewhere, and they are quite rightly flagging that up as an issue. So there's a kind of a limited pace of change, and they are recognising that there's a disproportionate representation of different groups who succeed and rise up in the industry. But there is they just using their words, a woeful lack of diversity within senior positions and key decision makers. So Ofcom are seeking to do further work around this and to look at things like the promotional prospects of people from different minority backgrounds, and to ask questions about how retention, not just recruitment, can be improved. So they've said that it's not just about employing people. If you're losing more people, it's about retention as well. So it kind of paints a picture which is still not a very good story, really, that of diversity in the radio and television workforce is quite limited, and that we still don't know what goes on. So I've got kind of set of questions and a set of issues that I think need to be taken into account to put this into context. First of all, it's obviously not a healthy picture of inclusivity, but some of which can be put down to, if you like, the evidence gathering process. Oh, thank you. Some of which can be put down to the evidence gathering process, some of which can be identified as cultural issues in the way that businesses and corporate organisations operate, how they recruit people, what kind of culture they project and what they empower people to fit in with and how they empower people. But others, I think, are compounded by structural issues, and some of which Ofcom is actually responsible for. And it might be an unintended consequence, but it's a consequence nevertheless of some of the ways that Ofcom has changed public policy about media, and I'll get onto that in a moment. So looking at these in turn, and as I say, it's kind of these are thoughts, and I want to elaborate on them and use them as part of a discussion. But again, community media, community radio hasn't been included in the diversity report. It's omitted. And from a diversity and equal opportunities point of view, that's a really massive omission. And primarily it's a massive problem because the number of community radio stations, access radio stations that are designated and designed to promote access from minority groups are not being incorporated into this knowledge data set. And that for me, just it's just a really appalling gap. And an obvious one that's easy to fix. Do some research in the community media. There's over 300 community radio stations. And Ofcom offers no verifiable, validated information from independent sources about who is engaging in that and what is being done and how people go about doing it. It's just not included. And yet it's one of the key links and the key platforms between people who are of don't get access to professional corporate or commercial media, often find a home in community media, and they do it on a voluntary basis. They give up their time for this, but there's no acknowledgement of this. And it's I think Ofcom's answer to this is that it's too difficult to measure. Well, if it's too difficult to measure, that's the job of the regulator to find out ways to quantify this and to find where the value is and what the experience is of people who are engaged in that sector. It's not the job of the regulator to back away because it's hard. So anyway, that's it's a shame, and a discussion needs to be had about how that can be changed. Secondly, I'm worried about the way that Ofcom, if you like, relies on its methodology here, which is the industry reporting on itself. So they're gathering data which is being gathered by the industry, which is fine. Organisations have an obligation under equalities legislation to understand who their workforce are, and they have a duty of care to people, and that means knowing who and what they do and where they're from, and they use that information sensitively and sensibly, and they can promote radical change if they wish on the basis of that. But it's kind of, the danger is you end up in a situation of confirmation bias, where people will say, we employ X, therefore we are a good organisation. And equalities and inclusivity doesn't work like that. And I kind of wonder that, for example, the British Crime Survey is done independently from the police. It's managed by an external set of research organisations. So just the industry reporting on itself kind of isn't good enough. It's not a robust methodology because you then can't compare data sets. Now, Ofcom does relate to other data sets, like the census, the Office for National Statistics data, all those kind of things. Quite rightly, it relates its information to them. But it doesn't undertake a clearly independent sample of data from across these sectors. And again, that kind of undermines the validity of what is being reported, I feel. So the other one is it's statistical information that is shared in the report. It does make a mention of conversations which are described as included conversations, respondents. But I couldn't find where that was identified as to what the nature of those conversations were. Was it just senior HR managers, or was it people on the ground? Was it staff? Was it people who actually work in the industry describing their experience? So it's a bit nebulous in that sense. And there is an essential element that to paint a full picture of what inclusivity and diversity means in practice and how we change it. It's all very well just presenting the numbers, but actually how do we change this? Has to come from people's lived experiences, and that has to be reported in the documentation that's given back to the industry and to government, into civic sector organisations. So again, it's got that kind of sense of it misses methodologically. It's a gap. It doesn't identify something which I think is quite essential as to how we can understand this. Next, Ofcom doesn't really include any participate, or doesn't report that it is engaged with a participatory stakeholder network or kind of group that it puts together. This is very much kind of reported research. They've got no links with equality organisations, civic society organisations, trade unions, faith groups. If you're talking about diversity, then there are issues that you need to get kind of consent from other civic sector organisations to ensure that people have confidence in the process of data collection and data management and reporting, so that you can, it's part of information that goes into the public domain. And yes, Ofcom is a trusted trusted organisation, but it needs to make, if you want to improve diversity in the industry, then Ofcom has to not just talk the talk, but it has to walk the walk as well. It has to do these things that make itself inclusive, and its reporting about issues in the UK media industry is inclusive as well. And that means building networks and partnerships with civic society organisations that are interested in social justice from all parts of the political spectrum, that are interested in kind of representation and identity and fairness. So not including those organisations is again kind of is a red flag for me. Next, the kind of boundaries are kind of self-determined. So broadcast media is kind of adjudged as being, kind of what does that mean? So much of our media today is not related to traditional broadcast radio or television. Are we restricting this purely to analogue broadcasting? Are we restricting this purely to somebody who speaks into a microphone? Whereas a lot of people's jobs these days, I suppose, you're looking at the diversification of the industry can no longer be described simply as broadcast, but it has to be considered as a mixed media ecological model. So the remit of the research really just needs to be extended on the basis that it can't stand still, and it has to change with the technology, and it has to change with the economic reality, and it has to change with the culture as well. As that changes, then also the methodology has to move forward as well, and the consequences of the reason that people might just be abandoning legacy industries because they see the future elsewhere, and that could be a positive story. Ironically, is that well-educated young people from diverse backgrounds are choosing to enter different fields. So there are other ways that this can be looked at. The other issue is I kind of feel that it's kind of the impulse for this is rooted in a kind of passive form of regulation, which doesn't really promote and push change. So this is where we get into the structural challenge, is that Ofcom's job primarily, although I think these are three equal factors, is economic regulation, platform or technical regulation, and then content and civic society public good regulation. And my view is that they are stacked in the wrong direction. They're stacked towards economic regulation, and they are stacked to platform regulation, but when it comes to civic engagement, public good matters, Ofcom is not fit for purpose in those terms, because it's compromised by its need to service those other two factors, because then Ofcom doesn't promote diversity. So, for example, the consolidation in the local radio sector that has taken place over the last 4 or 5 years has removed opportunities for people to establish and identify independent local media platforms. Ofcom have got a pause on analogue rollout for community radio at the moment. They're pushing their DAB radio that excludes low-income groups who aren't turning to DAB radio. Plus, you've got the rapid pace of technological change, and so I kind of feel like it's Ofcom has got its priorities the wrong way round. It's like the efficient use of spectrum. Yes, it's incredibly important, but that isn't the primary aim of a healthy, pluralistic, socially responsible broadcast sector. The aim of that is to produce something which we benefit from as a nation, as communities, as individuals. So I'm kind of worried about the way that this is framed in terms of Ofcom's whole ethos, and I think there needs to be some future revision of that role. We need to support. One of the reasons that community media is so important in this is that it is the primary platform that is readily available to many people, not everybody, but many people, to support cultural plurality, if I could say the word, to support access, to support content diversity, to give a space for experimentation, and for people to identify. One of the reasons that kind of people from ethnic minority backgrounds might not be entering the mainstream broadcast media industries because they're culturally sterile and don't give people something which they can identify with and take ownership of. So you're just servicing a very bland kind of sausage machine that produces generic sausages that nobody cares about. And they stack up this on the shelves and people buy them because there's kind of no alternative. And so unfortunately, I feel that some of Ofcom's active policies in some areas are actually what creates the problem in the first place. That we maybe need to see a shift and change in policy direction to give Ofcom a mandate for diversity. Not just diversity of staff within these organisations, but diversity of content, diversity of ownership, diversity of power over the media as well. So as I say, I kind of concluded a few years ago that Ofcom isn't really fit for purpose. I'd like to see it change. I'd like to see some conversations about where and when they go, how that transformation works. I'm very interested in the Media Reform Coalition's Media Commons approach. I think that looking at that early development of a manifesto for a pluralistic media commons is very encouraging, and I want to give some support to that. But we've got to, we've got to have some uncomfortable conversations. And as ever, I'm finishing off these discussions with the point that came through from the IPCC report recently, the International Panel on Climate Change, that we need systemic change at all levels of society. And my view is this must include our media, and this must be led by Ofcom, and that we can't hang around. We won't manage climate change if what we're doing is dragging our feet through a kind of hubristic, antagonistic, polarising, distant, unresponsive, anti-democratic model of media. And we need a regulator or an organisational body that puts citizenship at the heart of citizenship, community identity at the heart of our media. So, yeah, but I'm very happy to have a conversation about these things, and it would be interesting to find out what other people think about this topic. So hopefully we'll speak to you soon. If you want to get in contact with me, do it via Twitter or Instagram at Decentered Media, and the website is decentered.co.uk. And don't forget to go to our Patreon page and subscribe for a donation, and that gets you access to the Decentered Media weekly drop-in, Zoom drop-in that we run on a Tuesday evening, and we do occasional socials and podcasts and things like that. So we're just building up some capacity to do some more inclusive content. I kind of feel a bit more relaxed about sitting in a cafe talking at a screen, and I do find putting the headphones on seems to help me get over my public speaking anxiety. But anyway, we'll see how it goes. Have fun, take care, stay safe.
You've been watching a Decentered Media vlog with me, Rob Watson. To find out more, go to decentered.co.uk or follow on Twitter and Instagram at Decentered Media.